The 1981 film Gallipoli, directed by Peter Weir, is one of the most important works in Australian cinema and remains a defining story about the impact of war. On the surface, it is a war film, but it is much more than that. It is a story about two young men whose friendship becomes the emotional core of a journey from youthful optimism to devastating tragedy. Through their eyes, the audience experiences the excitement of adventure, the discovery of new places, and finally the harsh reality of the First World War. Gallipoli captures not only a key event in history but also the universal themes of mateship, innocence, sacrifice, and the futility of war. The story begins in Western Australia in 1915, where we meet Archie Hamilton, a gifted sprinter who dreams of running glory. He is young, idealistic, and full of energy. Archie believes strongly in honor and patriotism, and he sees the war as an opportunity to prove himself. In contrast, Frank Dunn, who becomes the second central figure of the story, is more cynical. Frank is an Irish immigrant who has little money and works odd jobs to get by. Unlike Archie, he is not driven by a sense of duty or patriotism and initially shows no interest in joining the army. Despite these differences, the two meet at a running competition, where they form a bond that quickly becomes the heart of the film. Archie represents innocence and youthful enthusiasm, while Frank represents caution and experience, and together they create a balanced friendship that gives the story much of its emotional power. When the two men enlist, the tone of the film is still light. Training takes them to Egypt, and for a time the war feels far away. The soldiers spend their days laughing, exploring Cairo, and joking with one another. These scenes show their youth and optimism, capturing the spirit of adventure that many young men felt when leaving home for the first time. But as the film progresses, the story gradually darkens. The soldiers are eventually sent to the Gallipoli Peninsula in Turkey, where the campaign against the Ottoman Empire has already turned into a long and bloody stalemate. Life in the trenches is harsh and suffocating, and the war no longer resembles the adventure the men imagined. This change in tone reflects the shift from innocence to harsh reality, both for the characters and for the audience. The climax of the film takes place during the Battle of the Neck, one of the most infamous moments in Australian military history. Poor planning, miscommunication, and rigid leadership result in wave after wave of soldiers being ordered to charge across open ground directly into enemy machine gun fire. Hundreds of young men are killed in just a few minutes, with nothing gained. The tragedy of the scene is intensified by the fact that the audience has spent so much time with these characters, laughing and sharing in their joy, only to watch them be sacrificed in a pointless assault. Archie's fate in this battle is especially powerful. Having been a runner throughout the film, his final sprint across the battlefield reflects both his passion for running and the futility of his sacrifice. The film ends with a haunting freeze frame as he is struck down, a moment that stays with viewers long after the credits roll. Gallipoli is not only a story about two young men but also a reflection on larger themes. One of the most important is friendship. The relationship between Archie and Frank is central to the film, and it represents the concept of mateship that is often celebrated in Australian culture. Their bond shows how friendship can provide strength, loyalty, and comfort even in the darkest situations. Another theme is the loss of innocence. At the beginning, the war is treated as an adventure, but by the end it has taken away everything from the characters, including their hopes and futures. This mirrors the real experience of an entire generation of young men who left for war expecting excitement and glory, only to face death and despair. The film also explores the futility of war. The Battle of the Neck is shown as a senseless tragedy caused by poor decisions and inflexible leadership. The young men who died there were not heroes in the sense of achieving victory but victims of circumstances beyond their control. The film refuses to glorify war or present it as noble. Instead, it shows war as wasteful and cruel. At the same time, Gallipoli reflects on national identity. For many Australians, the Gallipoli campaign is remembered as the birth of a national consciousness. Even though it was a military defeat, it came to symbolize qualities such as bravery, endurance, and loyalty. The film captures this idea, showing how the sacrifices of ordinary young men became a defining part of Australia's history. The performances of the actors help bring these themes to life. Mark Lee plays Archie Hamilton with a mixture of innocence, determination, and warmth, making the audience care deeply about his character. His portrayal captures the spirit of youthful idealism, which makes his tragic fate even more painful. Mel Gibson, in one of his early roles, brings charm, humor, and depth to the character of Frank Dunn. Frank's skepticism and would provide a counterbalance to Archie's optimism, and together the two actors create a believable and touching friendship that carries the film. The supporting cast also adds depth, portraying the other soldiers with humor, personality, and humanity. These smaller roles remind the audience that behind every soldier was an individual with a story, making the loss of life feel even more devastating. Peter Weir's direction is one of the film's greatest strengths. He takes his time in the first half of the film, allowing the audience to become invested in the characters before showing them in battle. This pacing makes the climax far more powerful, as viewers feel they truly know the young men whose lives are being wasted. The cinematography by Russell Boyd also contributes to the film's impact. Wide shots of the Australian desert emphasize freedom and opportunity, while the tight, suffocating trenches of Gallipoli emphasize fear and confinement. This visual contrast mirrors the shift in the story from innocence to despair. The music adds another layer, with Jean-Michel Jarre's electronic score giving certain scenes a haunting, almost timeless feeling, particularly during the running sequences. The choice of music helps lift the story beyond a simple war film, turning it into a reflection on universal themes of youth and sacrifice. To understand the significance of the film, it is important to remember the real history behind it. The Gallipoli campaign of 1915 was part of a larger Allied attempt to capture the Dardanelles Strait and open a supply route to Russia. Despite months of fighting, the campaign failed and resulted in heavy casualties on both sides. For Australia and New Zealand, Gallipoli became a defining national moment, remembered every year on Anzac Day. Although the battle was a defeat, it became a symbol of courage, endurance, and sacrifice. Gallipoli the film is not a documentary, and some details are dramatized, but it captures the essence of what the campaign meant both to those who lived through it and to later generations. When Gallipoli was released in 1981, it was praised both in Australia and internationally. It helped bring Australian cinema to a wider audience and established Peter Weir as a major filmmaker. It also played a role in shaping how Australians remembered the Gallipoli campaign. While history books and ceremonies kept the story alive, the film gave people an emotional connection, reminding them that behind the statistics of war were real individuals. The film contributed to national memory by highlighting the personal stories of ordinary soldiers, rather than focusing only on military strategy or politics. Even more than 40 years later, Gallipoli remains important. It continues to be studied in schools and shown on Anzac Day, and its themes of friendship, sacrifice, and the futility of war are still powerful. The film speaks not only to Australians but to anyone who has experienced or reflected on the impact of war. Its story of young men who leave home seeking adventure, only to face death in a foreign land, is one that has repeated throughout history and continues to feel relevant today. In conclusion, Gallipoli is a film that combines history, emotion, and storytelling into a timeless exploration of war and its effects. It is not just a war film but a story about friendship, innocence, and sacrifice. By focusing on the characters of Archie and Frank, the film brings history to life in a personal and moving way. The strong performances, careful direction, and striking cinematography create a film that remains both haunting and beautiful. Gallipoli continues to remind audiences of the cost of war and the importance of remembering the individuals behind the history. More than 4 decades after its release, it stands as one of the greatest Australian films and an enduring reminder of how war shapes both lives and nations.